Is he making a Republican majority more likely or more difficult with all of this?
Yeah, he knows how to win Republican primaries. That's pretty clear. His grip on the party remains firm. But in some of these cases, the Republican candidate that's being chosen is likely to be weaker in the general election in November. It doesn't matter in the Kentucky congressional race. That seat is all but guaranteed to stay with the GOP. But you look at the Texas Senate race, and that's one that ought to be tough for Democrats. Democrats haven't won statewide in Texas for decades, but it just got more possible with Paxton as the likely nominee, assuming he prevails in the primary runoff next week, than it would have been against John Cornyn, who has won that seat 4 times already.
And Bill, I want to play for you what we just heard from Speaker Johnson about the message that Massey's loss in Kentucky is sending right now to the rest of the Republicans in Congress.
The message is that we're advancing America's first agenda, the America First agenda. It's about bringing the country back. We need people here who understand that, who are not trying to carve out their own lane and do something that's destructive or counterproductive, I think, to the agenda. And that's what's happened. I never ask anybody to violate a core principle, but you have to give up on some of your personal preferences sometimes because you're in a deliberative body and you have 434 colleagues. We don't demand loyalty to the president. What I demand as Speaker of the House is loyalty to our core principles.
Hard to honestly make out what the message is there, Bill. I mean, don't want anyone to violate their core principles, but also stay in line?
Yeah, I think the message is shut up and stay in line, and before all the talk about principles is very nice. You can't carve out your own lane. You're elected by the voters. You take an oath to the Constitution. You don't work for the president, but can't really cross him. And Mike Johnson's pretending, well, he can't cross his colleagues. But of course, Mike Johnson is doing exactly what the president wants. Massey crossed Trump on Epstein. Let's not forget the issue that Trump really turned against Massey on. It was Epstein. And now the voters in his district responded to Trump's wishes. But look, let's not forget the voters. In Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who is gravely a conservative Republican conservative down the board, down the line, but he stood up to Trump courageously and correctly in 2020 when Trump tried to order him to flip 11,000, whatever it was, 870 votes. Remember that? And his deputy, actually, Jeffrey Sperling, also stood up to Trump. They both got crushed in the primaries they were running in this last night. So the voters, from my point of view, unfortunately, I got to say the Republican voters are with Trump. Maybe it hurts. I hope Trump's disapproval hurts the Republican Party, which is now so tied so closely to him in the general election in November. But no, so I do think it could hurt some. But some of these seats are, we'll see. We'll see. I think people shouldn't count those chickens before they hatch,
Well, Michael, I want your take on that. Bring us to Kentucky. Are the voters squarely with Trump? How is his grip on the party right now going down with being processed by people there?
Yeah, Antonia, it's extremely strong. I mean, President Trump was the central reason why so many voters I had spoken to said that they were sticking with Gallrein instead of Thomas Massie. I was at a polling place yesterday here in Hebron, Kentucky, and I was asking a number of voters, why are you supporting Ed Gallrein? And they said, well, it's because I don't support Thomas Massie. I don't like what he's done. I don't like the votes he's taken. My next question was, OK, which vote was most problematic for you? What drew the most criticism from you? And these voters, a number of them couldn't name anything. In fact, I had heard from one voter who said they didn't like that Thomas Massie supported Trump's impeachment. That's not true. Thomas Massie didn't vote to impeach President Trump. So it just showed that at the end of the day, regardless of any policy disputes that Gallrein had with Thomas Massie or Massie had with President Trump, it didn't matter. What it all came back to was the fact that Gallrein was backed by President Trump. Take a listen to some of the voters I had spoken to. Again, these are Gallrein voters making it very clear the reason why they were with him was because of Donald Trump.
I don't like his personality at all. But that's who Trump told me to vote for, so that's what I'm doing.
I'm not just, all whatever Trump says kind of person, but, usually what his way of thinking is my way of thinking.
So, Antonia, Thomas Massie tried to run a policy-based campaign here, saying he wanted to bring down deficits, keep the U.S. out of foreign entanglements and foreign wars. Even if some of these Republican voters here in this district agreed with those positions, it just wouldn't have been enough because they are so squarely aligned with President Trump. Now, in terms of what happens next for Thomas Massie, he told me last night during an interview at his election night HQ that he is very much so would be open to another political campaign in the future. In that room where he was delivering that post-election speech, there were chants of president coming from the crowd. And then there was even one supporter who had changed where it said Congress on a poster to change it to say president. So certainly will be interesting to see what Thomas Massie's next act is. I asked him if December will be the last that we hear and see from him. He said, I doubt it.
Michael, can I ask you a quick follow-up there? When you were speaking to voters and they said inaccurate things like Massie had voted to impeach President Trump, which he had not, when you informed them of the facts, did that seem to shift their thoughts at all, change their behavior, or even just make them reflect on some of the messaging they might have heard throughout the campaign?
It sort of left them at a loss for words. There was that one woman who I had spoken to who mentioned impeachment. I said, Thomas Massie didn't support President Trump's impeachment. Other than that, what ones of his policy decisions, policy proposals, stances or votes upset you the most? And she was at a loss for words. She didn't have an answer. And then I said, well, did President Trump's endorsement weigh heavily on your decision? That was where she was emphatic, where she said, yes, I agree with the president. I take my cues from the president. That's why it was so clear that Thomas Massie thought that he could win this on a policy-based campaign. I spoke to him the day before the election, and he told me the difference between him and Bill Cassidy and those Indiana state senators were the fact that 90% of the time he votes with Trump. In the 10% he doesn't, it's because he's aligning with his constituents rather than President Trump. Well, it seems to be that based on the results last night, that it doesn't matter if the constituents agree with that policy stance. What matters is that they like President Trump. And again, it seems to be the biggest driver of their votes here in Kentucky.
Yeah, incredible reporting, Michael. That's all very striking. Susan, there's also a new Associated Press poll out showing Trump's approval rating on the economy is just 37%. Among Republicans, it's down 16 points since February to 63%. I'm curious to what extent you think our sort of gerrymandered political structure and reality right now is responsible for this dynamic where the polling could not be more clear about voters, consumer sentiment, people's reaction to this war, to rising prices, and all of the headwinds, but also the reality that so few Republicans seem comfortable still speaking out about all of that.
Well, when you look at that new AP poll, it shows a Republican approval on the economy really low. That's a real red flag for the White House. But if you look at his overall job approval rating among Republicans in that poll, it's in the 70s. Donald Trump continues to have a hold on the imagination and the loyalty of most Republican voters. And even as, of course, Democrats universally opposed to Trump, independents have turned against him, and yet still Republicans hold firm. I went to that Rededicate 250 celebration on the Mall on Sunday, and that's definitely a core voter group for Donald Trump. People there told me, even those who were suffering because of the situation in rural America, the cost of gas, that they believe and trust in Donald Trump. And some of them said that, in fact, God had chosen Donald Trump to be the president. That's a bond that is hard to break.
Rosa, some of this may be playing a little bit different in Texas, where you are now that Trump has endorsed Ken Paxton, something that we know many traditional conservatives and Republicans in Texas were quite nervous about, just given John Cornyn's history in the state and what they believe to be his sort of electoral strengths. What are you hearing from people there?
Well, I've been talking to voters today here in Conroe, Texas, Antonia, and it's very interesting to hear what the other reporters are hearing, because what I'm hearing here in Conroe is this mix. There are voters who say that, yes, President Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton weighs heavily on them, encouraged them to come to vote today, and others who say that it doesn't carry as much weight as it used to. One man in particular that stands out to me said that it's because Texans are independent voters. They think independently. Now, they might come to the same conclusion and still vote for Ken Paxton, but it's the word usage that got me to thinking about the words that President Trump used in his endorsement. And so I want to read them to you because here's what the president said, quote, "The highly respected Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, an America First patriot and someone who has always been extremely loyal to me and our amazing MAGA movement." He went on to say about John Cornyn, "is a good man, and I worked well with him, but he was not supportive of me when times were tough." Again, there was a lot of, quote, me in that statement. And what I'm hearing from voters here in Conroe, Texas, is a lot about, well, what is better for Texas? And again, they might come to the same conclusion and still vote for Ken Paxton, but I'm hearing more, well, what's better for Texas? Now, as for the response from Ken Paxton, he was, of course, elated after the president endorsed him, going on Fox News, saying that the president had called him by phone and told him that he was the better candidate. As for John Cornyn, he says that Paxton is likely to lose. Take a listen.
We've always had these family fights within the Republican Party, and then we unify in order to win the election in November. And we'll do that again. But I believe that in terms of our success in November, that Ken Paxton would be an albatross around the neck of our candidates and would likely lose to James Tallarico. I think we've come too far and worked too hard to risk that.
Now, Antonia, I've got to share this anecdote with you because I talked to one woman who said that, yes, President Trump's endorsement encouraged her to come vote today. But she said that when she was at the polls, God was above Trump and that she prayed about her vote before actually casting her vote. So to what the other reporters were talking about in regards to, well, where does God stand in regards to Trump and all of that, what I've been hearing today is that, at least here in Conroe, Texas, from that one woman that I talked to, God is above Trump.